The first time my partner said it out loud, it sounded almost reasonable. We were standing in the kitchen late at night, the house quiet except for the hum of the fridge. I had just put my phone down after replying to a message, and they asked casually, "Was that them again?" I nodded. There was a pause. Then, "I don't think it's healthy that you're still in contact with that friend." That was the moment everything shifted. We'd been together for years. Built routines, shared plans, talked about the future in that half-serious way couples do when they're testing the idea out loud. We'd had disagreements before, but this felt different. This wasn't about how we spent money or whose turn it was to compromise. This was about erasing someone from my life. The friend in question had been there long before my partner. Not an ex. Not a secret crush. Just someone who knew me in a way that came from history, not intimacy. Someone who had seen me at my worst, celebrated my small wins, and stayed when things were inconvenient. At first, my partner framed it as concern. They don't respect our relationship. They rely on you too much. It feels like you're choosing them over me. Each sentence landed heavier than the last. I tried to explain that nothing inappropriate was happening. That our conversations were normal, supportive, sometimes trivial. That my friend wasn't a threat, just a constant. But the more I defended it, the more defensive my partner became. That's when the tone changed. "I'm not telling you what to do," they said. "I'm telling you what I need to feel secure." That sentence echoed in my head long after the conversation ended. Over the next few weeks, the issue came up again and again. Always calm. Always framed as emotional honesty. Always ending in the same conclusion. If I truly valued the relationship, I would cut ties. I started second-guessing myself. Was I being selfish for holding on to a friendship that made my partner uncomfortable? Was loyalty supposed to be exclusive? Was this just what commitment looked like at this stage of life? I tried to compromise. I limited contact. I stopped mentioning my friend altogether. I delayed replies so it wouldn't look like they mattered too much. I told myself this was temporary, that once my partner felt secure, things would ease. They didn't. Instead, the requests became more specific. "Why do you still need them? What do they give you that I don't? Can you honestly say you'd be fine if the roles were reversed?" And then came the ultimatum, delivered softly, almost sadly. "I can't keep doing this if they're still in your life." No yelling. No accusations. Just a boundary presented as a fact. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, realizing how trapped I felt. Not because I didn't love my partner, but because the choice they were asking me to make felt wrong no matter which way I turned. If I chose them, it'd be agreeing that love meant isolation. That reassurance required erasure. That my past had to be trimmed down to fit someone else's comfort. If I chose my friend, it'd be labeled disloyal. Unwilling to prioritize my relationship. Emotionally unavailable. The next day, I met my friend for coffee. I didn't tell them about the ultimatum. I just watched how easy the conversation was. How little effort it took to be myself. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't being asked to sever ties because of something my friend had done. I was being asked to do it because my partner couldn't tolerate not being the center of every emotional circle in my life. That realization hurt more than the idea of breaking up. When I finally confronted my partner, I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I just asked one question. If I give this up for you, what happens the next time something else makes you uncomfortable? They didn't have an answer. They said love requires sacrifice. I said sacrifice should come from fear. They said I was choosing a friend over a partner. I said I was choosing autonomy over control. In the end, I didn't cut my friend off. And my partner walked away. Some people tell me I should have chosen the relationship. That friends come and go, but partners are supposed to come first. Others tell me I dodged something dangerous before it got worse. All I know is this: being loved should not require shrinking your world. So now I'm left asking myself the question everyone else seems to have an answer to. Was I wrong for refusing to sever all ties with my friend when my partner asked me to? Or was that the moment I finally realized that love built on ultimatums isn't love at all? After they left, the apartment felt unnaturally quiet, like a place that hadn't decided yet whether it was empty or simply holding its breath. I told myself I was fine, that I'd made a principled choice, that standing up for a friendship didn't mean I loved my partner any less. But principles don't keep you warm at night, and certainty doesn't stop doubt from creeping in when there's no one left to argue with. For the first few days, I replayed every conversation we'd had about my friend. I wondered if it'd been too dismissive, too rigid. Maybe I could have reassured them better. Maybe I could have explained things more gently, less defensively. Maybe I could have anticipated their insecurity before it turned into resentment. Then I caught myself doing it again, rewriting history to make myself smaller. I remembered how it actually unfolded. How the concern hadn't started as fear, but as ownership. How I feel uncomfortable had slowly turned into you should NT need them. How my attempts to compromise were never met halfway, only used as proof that more could be taken. What haunted me most wasn't the breakup itself, but how normal the escalation had felt while I was inside it. At first, I'd thought their discomfort was temporary. Everyone has triggers. Everyone has baggage. I believed that if I just adjusted enough, things would stabilize. I reduced contact. I stopped sharing stories. I filtered my emotions so nothing seemed too deep, too meaningful, too threatening. And somehow, it still wasn't enough. That realization changed the way I saw the entire relationship. The issue had never been my friend. It had been the idea that my emotional world needed to be curated to someone else's tolerance level. A week later, my ex reached out. "I've been thinking," they wrote. "I still believe what I asked for was reasonable." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Reasonable for you," I finally replied. "But not for me." They sent back paragraphs about commitment, about boundaries, about how partners should come first, always, about how my refusal proved I wasn't ready for a serious relationship. Reading it, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Because buried beneath the logic and the emotional language was the same belief that had driven everything else. That love meant narrowing yourself until only one person remained at the center of your life. I didn't respond after that. In the weeks that followed, I noticed how slowly my sense of self came back. How much energy I'd been spending monitoring my words, my tone, my priorities. Without realizing it, I'd been living in a constant state of justification. Why are you texting them? Why do they matter so much? Why can't I be enough? Those questions stopped echoing once the person asking them was gone. My friendship didn't suddenly become more intense. It didn't replace the relationship. It simply returned to what it had always been. Steady, supportive, unremarkable in the best way. And that normalcy made one thing painfully clear. Healthy connections don't demand proof of loyalty. They assume it. I started seeing how easily boundaries can be used as a disguise for control. How often emotional language is employed not to understand, but to restrict. My ex never told me they were afraid of losing me. They told me they were afraid of sharing space with anyone else. That difference matters. I won't pretend I didn't miss them. I did. There were moments I almost reached out. Almost offered a compromise I knew wouldn't satisfy either of us. But every time I imagined going back, I pictured the next request, the next discomfort, The next person or habit or part of my life that would need to be softened, reduced, or removed. And I knew where that road led. I've been asked since then whether I regret my choice. Whether, in hindsight, I think I should have prioritized the relationship over the friendship. The honest answer is this. I don't regret refusing the ultimatum. I regret how long it took me to recognize it for what it was. Love should expand your life, not edit it down. If someone needs you to be isolated in order to feel secure, the problem isn't the people around you. It's the fear sitting at the center of the relationship, quietly calling itself devotion. So if I'm asking the question now, it's not whether I was wrong to keep my friend. It's why I ever considered that keeping someone who mattered meant betraying someone else. And the answer to that one is uncomfortable, but necessary. Because the moment love asks you to erase parts of yourself to prove it's real, it has already crossed a line that no compromise can fix. What followed was a long stretch of unlearning. I didn't realize how deeply the dynamic had sunk into me until I started questioning things that had nothing to do with my ex. When a new acquaintance asked about my social circle, I hesitated before answering. When someone invited me out, I caught myself wondering how it would look to a hypothetical partner. I was still editing my life for someone who was no longer there. That scared me. It made me see how close I'd come to internalizing the idea that my relationships needed to be ranked, justified, and constantly defended. That affection was something you earned by narrowing your world, not enriching it. I hadn't just been responding to my partner's insecurity, I'd begun to adopt it as a rule. I started therapy around that time, not because I was falling apart, but because I didn't want to repeat the pattern without understanding it. And one question came up again and again. When did you first learn that closeness means exclusivity? The answer wasn't immediate. But slowly, memories surfaced. Past relationships where jealousy was framed as passion. Situations where reassurance meant withdrawal from others. Praise for being low maintenance, which really meant emotionally self-contained. I'd been rewarded for making myself smaller long before this relationship ever began. Seeing that didn't make me angry at my ex. It made me sad, for both of us. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were trying to feel safe. But safety built on restriction isn't safety at all. It's containment. A few months later, I ran into them by chance. We were polite. Careful. They asked how it'd been. I'm good, I said, and meant it. They hesitated, then said, I still think you chose wrong. I nodded. I know. There was no point arguing anymore. We weren't disagreeing about facts. We were disagreeing about philosophy. To them, love meant prioritizing the relationship above all else, even at the cost of other bonds. To me, love meant trusting that a relationship could coexist with a full, connected life. Neither of us had changed our minds. And that was okay. Walking away, I felt a strange sense of closure. Not because it'd been validated, but because I no longer needed validation. I didn't need them to understand my choice for it to be the right one for me. Over time, I began dating again. Slowly. Intentionally. I paid attention to how people spoke about boundaries. Whether they used them to protect themselves or to limit others. Whether discomfort led to curiosity or control. The first time someone asked about my friend, I felt my body tense out of habit. But the conversation went differently. Oh, that's nice, they said. How long have you known them? No suspicion. No undertone. Just interest. That was the moment I fully understood what had been missing before. Not agreement. Not sacrifice. But trust that didn't need to be negotiated through loss. I don't believe my ex was a villain. And I don't believe I was perfect. But I do believe this. When someone asks you to sever a healthy bond to prove your loyalty, the request itself is the warning. Love shouldn't force you into isolation. Commitment shouldn't require erasure. And reassurance should never come at the cost of your identity. So if the question is whether I was wrong for refusing to cut my friend out of my life, my answer hasn't changed. I wasn't choosing one person over another. I was choosing a version of love that doesn't demand you amputate parts of yourself just to be accepted. And that choice, no matter how lonely it felt at first, gave me something far more lasting than any relationship built on fear ever could. Even with that clarity, there were still moments when doubt crept in quietly, usually when life slowed down enough to leave room for it. Late evenings were the hardest. That was when I'd remember how familiar my ex felt, how intertwined our routines had been, how easy it would have been to choose the path they laid out. Cut one person off. Prove devotion. Keep the relationship intact. From the outside, it looked simpler. Cleaner. Socially acceptable. People understand breakups over cheating, betrayal, obvious harm. They struggle with breakups over principles. When I explained why we ended, I saw it in their reactions. The pause. The subtle recalibration. So you chose a friend over your partner? Couldn't you have just distanced yourself? Isn't compromise part of love? I started shortening my explanations. Not because I was ashamed, but because I realized most people weren't actually asking to understand. They were measuring my choice against their own fears. Imagining what they would tolerate. Wondering what they might demand, or give up, in the same situation. What they didn't see was how gradual the erosion had been. It hadn't started with an ultimatum. It started with comments disguised as concern. With discomfort framed as intimacy. With reassurance that only flowed in one direction. Each request seemed reasonable on its own. Together, they formed a pattern I'd been slow to name. I'd lost something in that relationship long before it ended. The sense that my inner life was mine to define. I remembered the first time I hesitated before sharing good news with my friend, worried it might sound like emotional closeness. The first time I delayed a reply, not because I was busy, but because I didn't want to deal with questions later. The first time I felt guilty for laughing at a message that had nothing to do with my partner at all. Those weren't sacrifices for love. They were early warnings. As time passed, I became more aware of how easily love can slip into possession if it's fueled by fear. My ex wasn't trying to dominate me. They were trying to eliminate uncertainty. And in doing so, they tried to control variables that were never meant to be controlled. Other people, other bonds, other sources of meaning. I started noticing this dynamic everywhere. Friends who'd quietly lost touch with people after entering relationships. Couples who referred to outside friendships as threats. The way devotion is often measured by what you're willing to give up rather than what you're able to sustain. That realization didn't make me cynical. It made me careful. I began defining my own rules, consciously this time. Not rigid boundaries, but principles I refused to negotiate away. I wouldn't apologize for having a life beyond my partner. I wouldn't confuse jealousy with depth. I wouldn't accept ultimatums disguised as emotional needs. And I wouldn't stay in a relationship where reassurance depended on isolation. Months later, when I felt steady enough, I asked myself a question I'd avoided since the breakup. If my partner had come to me with the same request, roles reversed, what would I have done? The answer was immediate and unsettling. I would have been afraid, not of the friend, but of my own insecurity. I would have asked for reassurance, not erasure. I would have wanted to understand why I felt threatened instead of demanding the threat be removed. That's when I finally let go of the last trace of guilt. Because what I'd been asked to do wasn't about compromise. It was about compliance. And love that requires compliance is fragile by design. I don't know if my ex ever reflected on their role in the ending. I don't know if they still believe I chose wrong. But I do know this. I walk through my life now without constantly checking whether my connections are acceptable. My world feels fuller, wider, more honest. And every time I think back to that night in the kitchen, to the moment the request was first spoken aloud, I understand something I couldn't then. That was the moment the relationship revealed its limit. Not mine. Its own. And stepping away wasn't an act of defiance. It was an act of preservation. And that is where the story ends. Not with certainty that I did everything right, but with peace in knowing I didn't abandon myself to keep someone else comfortable. I didn't choose a friend over a partner. I chose a life where love doesn't require isolation, where trust isn't proven through loss, and where connection isn't treated as a threat. I understand now that relationships reveal their true shape at the point of tension. When fear enters, it either turns toward understanding or toward control. In our case, it turned toward control, even if it never used that word. Walking away hurt. Staying would have hollowed me out. I no longer measure love by what I'm willing to give up. I measure it by how much of myself I'm allowed to keep. And that, finally, feels like the right ending.